You handed us a really, just a fascinating stack of sources today.
Yeah, it's quite a mix.
It really is. I mean, we've got reports from offshore oil rigs, we've got some heavy cognitive research, and some truly harrowing emergency room case studies.
Right. It covers a lot of ground.
And the overarching mission you gave us with this material was to figure out why organizations so often fall apart at the seams during operational transitions.
Exactly. Because it happens constantly.
Usually when we talk about a massive industrial failure, there's this expectation of a spectacular, highly visible, inciting event.
Oh, absolutely.
We picture a sudden explosion or a massive piece of machinery literally breaking in half under pressure, and then the investigators can walk onto the site, point to the shattered metal on the ground and say, there it is. That right there is what went wrong.
Right. And it's a comforting way to view failure because it's binary.
Binary,
The
yeah.
machine was intact and then it wasn't. The moment of disaster is localized, it's visible, and, it's easy to categorize in a post-incident report.
But the moment you step into the world of operational transitions, those specific periods where one team is handing the steering wheel over to another, that clean, visible break just vanishes.
Completely vanishes.
We are suddenly looking at an organizational landscape that is incredibly murky. It urs an executive-level strategic paradox that affects literally every continuously operating industry on Earth, from manufacturing to logistics to healthcare.
Yeah, it spares no one.
So we are investigating a broader systems principle today, which is what happens when information is technically transferred, but context is totally lost.
And that gap between transferred information and missing context is, well, it's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Diagnostic muddy waters. I like that.
Because the failure is completely invisible, and it quietly compounds until it's far too late to simply patch it up.
Let's start with a staggering statistic from your sources that really sets the stakes here.
I think I know which one you're going to bring up.
Here's where it gets really interesting. According to the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers, the AFPM in the process industries, shift handovers take up less than 5% of an operations staff's total time.
Right. Less than 5%.
Yet, those exact moments account for 40% of all industrial incidents.
It's just a wild number.
A 5-minute chat at 6 in the morning becomes the root cause of nearly half of all disasters.
Yeah, and when you really sit with that math, it forces a complete reevaluation of what a handover actually is.
How so?
Well, the typical management view treats a handover as a passive administrative event. A box to check.
Right, just sign in a logbook.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to understand that 40% incident rate, we have to look at the handover as an active, high-stakes production process in its own right.
A production process.
Yeah, because when two operators are standing at a desk at the end of a long shift, what they're manufacturing isn't a product, and it isn't a report. They're actively manufacturing understanding.
Manufacturing understanding. Wow. If that's the true goal, then how did we get to a place where we so frequently confuse handing over a logbook with handing over reality?
That's a great question.
I mean, it seems like we fundamentally misunderstand what communication is actually supposed to achieve in these environments.
We absolutely do. And it stems from a deeply ingrained, flawed theory of communication that, well, we all operate under every single day.
Okay, lay it on me.
There's a foundational piece of research in your stack by Ron Lardner from 1996. It's an offshore technology report for the UK Health and Safety Executive. And he dismantles this beautifully.
Right. I read this. He identifies what he calls the conduit metaphor.
Exactly, the conduit metaphor.
Which is basically the idea that human communication is just a physical pipe.
It is the universally accepted yet entirely false assumption that communication is just a passive tube where information is dumped from person A's brain directly into person B's brain.
We treat human dialogue like downloading a PDF to a hard drive.
Yes. Lardner points out that under the conduit metaphor, organizations assume that as long as the raw data physically arrives at its destination, the intrinsic understanding of that data automatically arrived with it.
But I was looking at Carl Weick's research on this, and he just shatters that assumption.
He really does.
He looked at handoffs not as data transfers, but as profound cognitive transitions. He says it's a highly vulnerable moment where sense-making, the actual human interpretation of reality is surrendered by the outgoing party and has to be actively reconstructed from scratch by the incoming party.
And the difference between Wake's view and the conduit metaphor is the difference between transferring activity versus transferring judgment.
Break that down for me. Activity versus judgment.
So activity is just a chronological list of what happened over the last 12 hours.
Yeah.
The pump turned on, the pressure went up, we checked the valve.
Right, just a timeline.
But judgment is what that list actually means for the next 12 hours.
Oh, I see.
When the outgoing shift clocks out, they take the local context, the nuances, and the judgment with them in their heads. They walk out the door with the reality of this situation.
Leaving the next shift with what?
The incoming shift merely inherits a historical record, a piece of paper, or, a digital dashboard.
There is a really subtle, almost dangerous workplace irony to this dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you picture a typical handover desk in a modern facility, it looks meticulously clean.
Oh, always.
The binders are perfectly aligned, the digital workflow boxes are all checked green, the outgoing operator smiles and says, "Have a good shift."
Right.
There is this polished veneer of total order.
And researchers refer to that specific phenomenon as the illusion of completion.
The illusion of completion.
Right, because the administrative record is static, so it looks perfect. But operational understanding is dynamic and messy.
So the organization falls into the trap of confusing the bureaucratic activity of completing a logbook with the cognitive achievement of shared understanding.
That's exactly it.
It is like handing someone a grocery receipt and expecting them to know what recipe you were planning to cook.
That is a perfect analogy.
The raw ingredients are all listed right there on the paper, sure, but what is the actual meal? But wait, I want to push back on this for a second.
Okay, go for it.
If I am the incoming shift supervisor and I have the exact same training, the exact same safety certifications, and I'm reading the exact same standard operating manual as the outgoing supervisor,
Right.
shouldn't the raw data on that receipt be enough for me to figure out the recipe on my own? If we both know how to cook, why do I need you to explain the receipt to me?
It's a highly logical assumption, and it's the exact assumption that most standard operating procedures are built upon.
But it's wrong.
It assumes that human beings process raw data objectively, like a machine, during these transitions.
And we don't.
We don't. We are heavily influenced by our own internal mental models and cognitive biases, and that cognitive friction is the root cause of missed context.
Okay, so what does a mental model actually look like in the context of an industrial floor or an ER?
The Yokogawa research in your stack provides a great framework for this. An operator's mental model isn't the standardized textbook they read during orientation.
Right.
It is a highly organized, deeply internalized structure of reality built on personal, field-based experiences. It is shaped by the specific upset conditions they've personally lived through.
Meaning, if I've been working the refinery floor for 10 years and you've been working it for 2 rees, we could be staring at the exact same pressure gauge, reading the exact same number, but we are perceiving 2 completely different realities based on our historical experiences with that specific pipe.
Exactly. That historical experience completely dictates what you consider to be important.
Wow.
Because the outgoing shift unconsciously assumes the incoming shift shares their exact personalized mental model. They filter out crucial details.
No, they just don't mention things.
Right. They omit things from the handover because their brain tells them, oh, that's obvious, or that's standard procedure, I don't need to mention it.
But it is only obvious to the person who's been standing there for the last 12 hours.
Bingo.
When that gap between mental models happens in a high-stakes environment, the consequences are immediate and tragic. Which brings us to the case study from the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality's Patient Safety Network, PSNet.
Yeah, this one is tough.
It's an incredibly difficult case to read, but it illustrates the mechanics of this cognitive failure with devastating clarity.
It really is a textbook example of how the illusion of completion allows critical context to vanish into thin air while the technical data remains perfectly documented.
Let's walk through it. The case involves a 41-year-old woman who arrives at the emergency room exhibiting mental status changes. She is highly confused and disoriented.
Right.
The initial ED team runs a battery of tests, and they anchor on a diagnosis of a urinary tract infection and anemia, believing the infection is causing her confusion.
Which, on the surface, is a plausible initial theory.
Sure. So eventually, the outgoing ER doctor shift ends. He signs the patient out to the incoming internal medicine team. And the sign-out note is administratively complete.
Perfectly filled out.
It says, she is admitted, diagnosis is UTI, and anemia. And there's one other note on her chart. It says a critical lab result, her platelet count is, quote, pending.
Just that single word. Pending.
Yeah.
And when we view that word through the lens of cognitive bias, we can trace exactly how the system broke down.
Because the failure wasn't medical initially, right? It was cognitive.
Exactly. First, we see a massive anchoring bias.
Yeah.
The initial ER team anchored so heavily to their first plausible diagnosis of a UTI
Yeah.
that they framed the entire patient narrative around it.
They found an answer that fit the basic symptoms and they locked it in.
Then the framing effect takes over.
Right.
When the incoming internal medicine team accepted the handover, they viewed all the new data strictly through the frame of that existing UTI diagnosis.
They didn't rebuild the reality. They just accepted the receipt they were handed.
Yes. And there's a Canadian safety expert, Pat Crosscarry, who has a brilliant observation regarding this exact phenomenon.
What does he say?
He notes, when the diagnosis is made, the thinking stops.
Wow. When the diagnosis is made, the thinking stops.
It's chilling, really.
That completely reframes this case for me. Because if the cognitive heavy lifting is perceived to be finished, that pending lab result never stood a chance of being processed correctly.
Because the critical thinking had ceased, the teams fell victim to a fatal structural process failure.
And this is where it goes from bad to worse.
Yeah. 4 hours after the handover, that pending lab result finally came back from pathology.
Her platelet count was 4,000.
And to put that in perspective for people who might not know, a normal human platelet count ranges between 150,000 and 400,000.
So a count of 4,000 is catastrophically low.
It is beyond critical. The physical result was routed to the floor and received by a unit secretary.
But because the context was lost during the handover specifically, the context of who actually owned the responsibility of following up on that pending result, neither the ER attending nor the internal medicine team was notified.
The result was literally sitting there, but no one knew it was their job to look at it.
Nobody owned it.
Right. By the time the internal medicine doctor finally checked the updated labs the next morning, 16 hours later, the patient's physical condition had severely deteriorated.
And she was finally correctly diagnosed with TTP.
Yes, thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura. It's a rare, aggressive blood disorder where microscopic blood clots form throughout the body, consuming all the platelets in the process.
And it requires immediate plasma exchange to survive.
But because of the delay, it was too late. She tragically passed away within 48 hours of arriving at the hospital.
It is utterly heartbreaking, especially when you realize the sheer amount of data the system had at its disposal.
The conduit metaphor failed them entirely.
The data transferred perfectly. The ink was on the page, platelet count pending. But the understanding of responsibility did not transfer at all.
No, it didn't. The outgoing doctor wrote pending and internally thought, I'm explicitly flagging this, so obviously the next team will check it.
And the incoming team read pending and internally thought, she's already admitted for a UTI, the ED team already did the critical thinking, this is just routine paperwork finishing up.
The physical transfer of the chart was flawless.
Yeah.
The cognitive transfer of ownership was non-existent.
Man. And while this specific disconnect resulted in a devastating loss of life, in other industries, failing to transfer ownership doesn't always result in immediate tragedy.
Right. Usually the stakes aren't immediately life or death.
More often, it creates a massive invisible ripple effect of friction across an entire organization.
Exactly.
The tragedy in the ER shows what happens when missing context causes immediate harm. But in a massive manufacturing facility or a tech company, the system usually catches the error before the metaphorical explosion, but that safety net is definitely not free.
Not free at all.
And that brings us to the hidden tax organizations pay just to figure out what the previous shift was doing. When a facility loses context, it quietly and expensively begins reconstructing the reality it already possessed an hour earlier.
The organization effectively pays to learn the same lesson twice.
Paying twice for the same work.
Yeah, and the distributed compensation behavior that kicks in to fix these gaps is one of the most fascinating and costly aspects of modern operations.
There is a classic case study from Deviant Learning that perfectly captures this mundane, everyday bleeding of resources.
Oh, the pretty quiet case.
Yes, the pretty quiet case. Imagine a chemical plant at 6 in the morning. The night shift technician is packing up his bag. He's exhausted. The day shift technician walks in with his coffee and asks how the night went.
And the night shift guy shrugs and says, pretty quiet. Compressor 3 was acting up a bit. See you tomorrow.
Acting up a bit.
It sounds entirely benign. It sounds like something that doesn't even warrant a formal note.
Exactly. But 2 hours into the morning, the day shift discovers that acting up a bit actually meant compressor 3 was tripping every 90 minutes on high discharge pressure, and the night shift had been manually resetting the system all night long just to keep it online.
So the incoming shift inherited a mystery, not a smooth operation.
Right.
because the outgoing shift didn't transfer the judgment, the
Hmm.
critical context, that this was a recurring systemic issue requiring continuous manual intervention. The incoming shift has to become detectives.
They have to figure it all out from scratch.
Yeah. They run extra verifications, they duplicate diagnostic work, they send a junior operator out to physically re-inspect valves that the night shift already inspected 3 hours ago.
Think about your own Monday morning handoffs, or jumping into a messy Slack channel after a week of PTO. It's actually like an entire family spending all morning tearing the house apart looking for the car keys when someone else in the house already found them and put them on the kitchen counter, but just didn't leave a note.
Right, the house didn't burn down, no one got hurt.
But you just wasted a massive amount of collective energy reconstructing a reality that someone else already figured out.
And in an industrial or corporate setting, that wasted energy translates directly to financial loss.
How do they measure that?
Well, Teep Track, which is an operational excellence firm, they refer to the specific type of friction as invisible losses within OEE.
OEE, meaning overall equipment effectiveness.
Yes.
For those newer to the manufacturing side, OEE is basically the gold standard metric for productivity. It measures how much good product you actually make compared to what you theoretically should have made if every machine and process ran perfectly.
Right. And when an incoming shift lacks immediate structured context regarding machine fatigue or a temporary bypass setting, you get these micro downtimes.
Micro downtimes.
The operators spend crucial minutes re-verifying assumptions, cautiously testing parameters, and repeating diagnostic errors.
Just feeling around in the dark.
Exactly. And this friction steadily, silently erodes profitability. It doesn't show up on a balance sheet as a catastrophic failure. It shows up as a mysterious 4% drop in quarterly efficiency.
And we see the exact same pattern in digital workflows. You don't need a physical compressor to experience this.
Oh, totally.
ServiceNow's Process Mining Group published data showing that when you analyze enterprise digital workflows, you literally see incident tickets stalling out. You see active cyber threats going unaddressed purely because the containment measures the previous shift took weren't communicated at the shift change.
So the enterprise is paying the salaries of two separate teams to do the exact same diagnostic work.
Exactly. The night shift diagnosed the cyber threat, contained it, but didn't pass the context. Now the day shift sees the anomaly and has to diagnose it all over again.
And relying on memory is statistically disastrous here.
Why is that?
The data shows that with unstructured, purely verbal handovers, there is a 75 to 80% memory decay by the end of a shift.
80%.
Yeah. The day shift operator isn't going to remember that casual comment about compressor 3 by noon. The context just evaporates.
Which brings us to the ultimate question for any leadership team listening to this. We know human beings have unavoidable cognitive biases. We know unstructured verbal handovers decay almost instantly in our memory. And we know that organizations bleed money and risk lives trying to rediscover lost context.
Right.
So how do management teams design a system that forces the transfer of understanding and not just the transfer of activity?
Well, the most effective antidote to the context gap is a concept known as structured reduction.
Structured reduction, meaning less is more.
Basically, yes. Elite operations do not solve this problem by adding length to handovers. They don't want a 45-minute philosophical conversation. They solve it by forcefully removing the noise.
Because more talking doesn't equal more understanding.
Exactly. A 30-minute rambling conversation is actually far more dangerous than a 10-minute structured one, because the critical anomalies get buried under mundane details.
Oh, that makes sense.
A tightly structured handover takes 10 to 15 minutes, but it proactively saves 45 to 90 minutes of that detective work on the back end.
Your sources included a fantastic 5-element checklist from Dovient specifically designed for maintenance teams. And it perfectly illustrates how structured reduction actually works on the floor. I really want to interrogate each of these elements because it's not just a list of chores, it is a psychological tool.
It is entirely about forcing the outgoing shift to articulate their judgment.
Let's go through them. Element 1 is equipment status. But the checklist doesn't just ask if the machine is running or down. It specifically requires the operator to note if the equipment is operating in a degraded or bypassed state.
Because the distinction there is vital for situational awareness. Running does not mean healthy.
Right.
If a massive industrial pump is technically running, but the night shift had to bypass the main filtration system to keep it going, the incoming shift absolutely needs to know that.
Because if they just see you running on the log, they will assume the product quality coming out of that pipe is standard.
Exactly. And hours later, the quality control lab is going to reject an entire batch of product because it's contaminated, all because the bypass context wasn't transferred.
Wow. Okay, element 2 is open work orders. And again, the structure demands exact progress. It forbids vague updates like, we started fixing the conveyor.
Right, it demands the main shaft is aligned, but we are currently waiting on the warehouse to deliver the coupling.
It eliminates the need for the incoming team to walk all the way out to the machine just to figure out what step of the repair process they are on.
Yes. Now, element 3 focuses on safety concerns, specifically active lockout tagout procedures.
Or LOTO, as they call it.
Right. These are the physical locks placed on machinery so it doesn't accidentally turn on while someone is inside it. This is the transfer of lethal context.
Lethal context.
If you don't know a system is locked out, or why it's locked out, the assumptions you make can literally kill someone.
That's terrifying, but makes total sense. Element 4 is pending tasks. This is simply explicitly stating what did not get done. It manages expectations instantly. But element 5 is where the real magic happens, I think. Observations and notes.
Ah, yeah. That is the capture of tribal knowledge.
Tribal knowledge.
This is where the operator notes the strange, high-pitched whining noise a boiler feed pump started making at 3 in the morning.
Even if it hasn't broken yet.
Exactly. It hasn't tripped an alarm. It wouldn't generate a formal digital work order. But the incoming shift needs that human context, so their ears are primed to listen for it.
But checklists alone aren't a silver bullet, are they?
No, they're not.
Because if we look back at the emergency room tragedy, they essentially had a checklist. The chart had a box for pending labs, and it was filled out. You could robotically check all 5 boxes on the deviant list and still fail to transfer the ownership of the problem.
And you've hit on the exact limitation of bureaucracy. Checklists transfer data efficiently, but they don't inherently transfer authority.
So how do you fix that?
That's where the MOXO workflow principle comes in. Right. The MOXO framework dictates that a handover must be an explicit transfer of responsibility. Every single transition must explicitly answer 4 questions.
Okay, what are they?
What is the abnormality? What is the containment action currently in place? What is the next required action? And most importantly, who is the owner?
Who is the owner?
Yeah.
If that single structural question had been mandated in the ER handover, who is the owner of following up on the pending platelet lab?
The outgoing doctor would have been forced to write down the name of the incoming attending.
The context of responsibility would have been cemented.
And that patient might still be alive today.
Unbelievable.
By forcing the identification of an owner, you fundamentally change the cognitive stance of the incoming team. They are no longer passive recipients of a historical report. They are designated as the active inheritors of a live problem.
And Yokogawa takes this transfer of ownership a step further with a 4-step verbal validation process. I was reading through this in the notes you share, and it looks like it's specifically designed to break down what researchers call the authority gradient.
Yes, the authority gradient.
Which is that very real workplace dynamic where a junior operator is just too intimidated to question a senior operator's cryptic notes.
Right.
So it forces what they call co-orientation. How does this 4-step loop actually play out between 2 workers?
It's a closed-loop communication protocol, very similar to military standards.
Okay.
Step 1, the outgoing operator verbally describes the entry on the checklist.
Simple enough.
Step 2, the incoming operator is structurally required to question it or ask for clarification.
So they can't just nod.
They cannot just nod.
No, okay.
Step 3 is the most critical of its son. The incoming operator must state the expected results based on that information.
And step 4.
The outgoing operator confirms or corrects that expectation.
So they are actively, forcefully comparing their mental models in real time. The incoming operator has to say, okay, if you say the compressor is running on a bypass loop, my expectation is that the line pressure will drop by 10% over the next hour. Is that what I should expect?
And the outgoing operator says, no, actually, because of the ambient temperature, the pressure should remain completely stable. If it drops, you have a problem.
Boom. The mental models are aligned.
The ambiguity is completely erased.
Wow.
This is the exact same joint sense-making protocol utilized by high-reliability organizations like nuclear submarine crews during a watch turnover or NASA mission control during a shift change.
They don't mess around.
They don't. They use unambiguous language, formal readbacks, And they absolutely limit external interruptions during these transitions. The environment is treated as sacred for those 10 minutes.
I hear all these four-step readbacks, strict five-element checklists, and Moxo's mandates of ownership, and I just have to ask the practical question. If I am a technician at 6 in the morning, I've just worked a grueling 12-hour shift, my feet hurt, and I'm exhausted. I just want to go home and sleep. Doesn't layering on all this rigid bureaucracy just guarantee that I'm going to start mindlessly ticking boxes to satisfy management?
It's a fair point.
I mean, does adding rules to a tired brain actually improve decision quality?
It was the most common and practical pushback management receives. But the cognitive research proves the exact opposite is true.
Really?
There was a pivotal 2011 study by Plocher and his colleagues at the Anjin refinery in South Africa. And they proved empirically that unstructured handovers actually increase the cognitive load on the tired worker.
Wait, having fewer rules makes it harder on the brain.
Significantly harder.
How?
Because if you just hand an exhausted incoming operator an unstructured chronological journal of everything that happened over a 12-hour shift, that incoming operator has to manually sift through pages of routine, meaningless activity just to hunt for the one critical anomaly.
Oh, I see.
It requires massive cognitive effort to separate the signal from the noise.
And a highly structured, exception-based checklist does that filtering for them.
Precisely. The structure highlights only what is abnormal, what is degraded, and what needs immediate ownership.
It removes the burden of discovery.
It actually makes the handover much faster, and it massively reduces the cognitive temperature of the entire plant. You aren't adding bureaucracy to punish the worker. You are providing a cognitive life raft for a fatigued brain.
That makes total sense when you frame it around cognitive load. You're purposefully stripping away the 95% of things that went perfectly normal so the incoming team can focus all their remaining fresh mental energy on the 5% that might actually cause a disaster.
Yes.
If we pull all these threads together, we started today by looking at handovers that appeared flawless on paper. The desks were clean, the digital logs were signed, the boxes were checked green. The transitions were administratively complete, but the transfer of understanding was completely absent.
And that administrative illusion is the great trap of modern management. Right. The final takeaway here is that the highest performing organizations across any complex industry, whether it's healthcare, heavy manufacturing, aviation, or enterprise tech, they are not the ones that transfer the most information.
No.
They're the ones that transfer the most useful understanding. They recognize that a transition is not an administrative boundary. It is a highly vulnerable cognitive relay.
You are not passing a piece of paper. You are passing the baton of situational awareness.
Beautifully put.
Viewing a transition as a cognitive relay completely changes the operational mandate. But before we wrap this up, the sources you brought included a fascinating look toward the future, specifically regarding how we will manage these transitions as technology evolves.
Yeah, we have to talk about this.
It's a slightly provocative thought to end on.
It is, and it draws on a report from Syntef and the CRC Press regarding sense-making in complex, modernized situations.
Okay, what do they say?
Well, as every industry moves rapidly into an era of massive automation, digital twins, and AI-driven process mining, we face a new, very modern danger.
Which is?
We risk digitizing our operational logs so perfectly and so comprehensively that we assume we can strip away the human intermediation layer entirely.
Meaning, the computer dashboard tells us everything so perfectly in such high resolution that we don't think human operators need to talk to each other to explain what it means.
That is the exact risk.
Wow.
Think about it. If an AI dashboard perfectly logs every single pressure variance, temperature fluctuation, and systemic parameter,
Right.
but it removes the human feel for a system's abnormal boundaries. The intuition a veteran operator has when a machine just sounds tired, or the urgency a doctor feels when they write the word pending.
Yeah.
If we remove that, are we inadvertently engineering a future where we have infinite information but absolutely zero context?
Infinite information, zero context.
If the AI perfectly transfers the data, who is left to transfer the judgment?
It takes us right back to the very beginning of our conversation. You might have a perfect digital log of the exact millisecond. A machine exceeded its pressure limits. You might have high-definition video of the sudden explosion and a perfect metallurgical breakdown of the shattered metal on the ground.
The binary failure.
Right. But if we lose the human context to understand why the previous shift allowed the pressure to build in the first place, or who is supposed to be responsible for the bypass valve,
We're right back in those diagnostic muddy waters.
and this time we're drowning in a sea of perfect data.
It is a profound paradox that every executive and operations manager needs to be grappling with right now before the human element is engineered entirely out of the equation.
It's an incredible paradigm shift. Thank you for bringing these sources to the table and joining us on this deep dive into the true cost of missing context. We hope this exploration gives you a powerful new lens to look at your own team's transitions, whether they happen on a refinery floor, in an emergency room, or just in a Monday morning meeting. Until next time, keep questioning the obvious.